All right, so this is step 2 to our bezel setting project. So last class, what we did was we made our bezel wire. We wrapped our bezel wire around our stone, soldered it so that it fit our stone, and then sat and sanded it nice and flat. So we sat at our table and we sanded our bezel wire nice and flat. We tested our bezel wire by putting it on a flat piece of metal and getting down to its level and making sure that there's no air anywhere between the bezel wire and your flat base piece of metal. So now we need to solder your bezel wire to your base piece of metal. First things first, you need to make sure your base piece of metal is large enough for your design, and you need to make sure that your bezel wire is perfectly formed to your stone before you do anything else, because you cannot fix it after it's soldered. It must be perfectly even around your stone. So now that this is sanded, fit around my stone, now I'm ready to solder. So we are going to be doing a perpendicular solder for this piece. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to paint the whole base with some flux. I like to paint the whole base because that way I know that we are not missing any area. And in my design, as you can see, this will be the design I'm going to be working with. I'm going to be offsetting my stone to the side, so it's going to be asymmetrically balanced. So I'm going to be placing my bezel set a little bit lower and off to the side of my base metal. I'm using 2 different color metals for this project just because I think it'll be aesthetically pleasing. So I'll have a gold bezel set and a silver background. So now that I have my flux laid down, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start to set my solder. My solder is going to go to the inside of my bezel wire, and it's going to be about 1/8 of an inch apart. And I'm going to place my solder conveniently into the center. This is the way I do it. It's a little bit quicker. You can choose to pick up each piece if you like. But if you do not want to pick each piece up, I just put a few into the center, and then I will push the solder against the bezel wire, but flat down on the metal. The goal here is to make sure that we're going to get a silver line, meaning all the solder is going to flow and there won't be any breaks in the solder joint. If you move your bezel wire slightly, you just have to push it back. It takes a little finesse. Don't dump a whole bunch of solder chips in there, just a few. It also depends on the size of your solder chips. If they're small, they should be closer together. If they're large, they can be further apart. Okay, just a few more, and I'm set up here. Okay. All right, now that all my chips are placed, I'm just going to double check that they're all touching the bezel wire and that there's not a gap. Like this one's just a little bit far away, so I'm just going to gently push that a little bit closer so we can make sure we get a good soldered joint. So this is how it should look. As you can all see. Take a look, children. Okay. All right, so now we are going to flow our solder. We're going to use about a medium heat because we do not want to melt our bezel wire or melt our bezel wire joint. We used hard solder for that one. Torch I have is a little bit light, so hope that it works. So you want to turn this torch all the way up. And you're going to need a solder pick for this. So it's going to be a nice slow heating. The goal is to heat your piece from underneath. That's why we're going to be heating this on a honeycomb. So notice how I'm going around the bezel wire. I'm not coming close to it yet. I'm trying to get everything nice and evenly heated. Also, because the base piece of metal is thicker than your bezel wire, you want to make sure your base piece of metal is nice and hot. Okay, my flux is white and starting to become clear on the outside. So now I'm just going to do a little pass around the top. I'm going to bring my torch closer. Okay, so my solder is starting to flow. So I'm just going to move my torch slowly around, and I'm looking for a silver line that's going to start to appear, and it's just going to crawl around your bezel wire. And you should be seeing it appear also on the outside. Some of my solder's moved, so I'm just going to push that back. Key is to get your solder to flow before your flux exhausts. If your flux exhausts, it turns black, and then it doesn't keep the metal clean, and then you can't flow your solder because solder will not flow on dirty metal. I'm using my pick just to spread the solder around. Make sure I'm getting that silver line. It's just creeping around the outside edge. Just a little bit right here. I'm just going to do a little check. I'm going to go all the way around the outside with my torch now and make sure that I don't have any breaks in my joint, and I don't. Just like that. Magic of television. Okay, so we're going to quench this guy here. And now my bezel wire is completely sealed, and you can see the silver line around the outside edge. If you don't see the silver line, then you're going to need to resolder. So this is going to go in the pickle for 10 minutes. Before I pickle this, I need you all to do something for me. You need to go to the drill press. You need to drill a hole right in the center of your piece, right here. Because if you go to try to test your stone and your stone doesn't fit, then you won't be able to pop it out. But this way, if we have a hole there and I go to test my stone to make sure my stone's going to fit in there, I can easily put a pin through the back and then pop it on out. And my stone just fits just fine. Just like that. So then I can pop my stone out and then solder this base piece of metal, or I'm sorry, pickle this base piece of metal for a minimum of 10 minutes.